Alright, so we have a water rower here. Today we're going to be replacing the water tank. It's got a crack in it, they need it replaced. Several other reasons, the bearing, whatever reason it is, if you need to replace the tank, that's what this video is for. So we've got our tank here, we've got our foot plates, we've got the long rails, the seat's already removed off of here. We've got the handle here. In the front, we've got these bolts to maintain the tank in place. So first step we're going to do is remove these two pegs with a 5mm Allen key. Once the peg's removed, you can pull the back plate back. We remove the top cover, you just lift and pull. I put it on the ground and I use it to maintain my hardware. Next step is we use a 4mm Allen key to remove these two bolts. Now that these two bolts have been removed and we put them in the top cover to maintain the hardware, we'll come to the front and we remove these two Allen keys here. These are pretty long bolts and there are retaining nuts in the board here and on the other side. So when you loosen the bolt here, this will fall. So be ready to catch it because these clubs are dark and you don't want to lose that nut because then you won't be able to put it back together. Turn that light on there. On. Boom. There and there. I thread the cylinder nut back onto the long bolt to keep from losing it. Put it back into the case. Now that the hardware has been removed, we can lift this board. Now be careful when you lift it because the sensor is still attached. So we need to disconnect the sensor right there. Now that we have it off, we can inspect the sensor for damages. And if there are problems with the sensor at this point, you can replace it. There'll be Phillips head screws there, and there. And then usually there's a staple here. So you'll pull the staple out, unscrew those, take off the bad sensor, and replace with the good sensor. The sensor disc is right here. So this is how the sensor works. Each individual teeth on the sensor wheel will pass through the mouth of the sensor, and that's how it's read. If there's physical damage to the sensor wheel, if any of these pegs are missing, it will cause it to read wrong. If the sensor wheel or sensor disc sits too low and does not come into contact in between the sensor, then it will also read wrong. So you have to make sure that there's no physical damages to here or to the sensor. If the club states that it's not reading right, it's either the sensor disc, the sensor, or a combination of the both. So best bet is to replace both if you don't find any damages. Alright, so next, these brackets need to come off in order to put them onto the next tank. At the same time, make sure that the monitor is mounted correctly. This pin should be compressing that spring in order to hold tension on it and hold it in place and through the holes. Obviously this one is out, so we have to make sure that we compress the spring, hold it in place with the pin, and that should better mount this console. For now we need to remove the console with the 4mm bolts there, and there. My mistake, that is a 5mm Allen key. So the Allen keys that were here and here, keeping that side of the bracket, are easy to remove. This one has a little hole here, so that way you can remove that one really easy. This one, there's no hole to access it, and it's too large to fit through here. So this one can be tricky if you don't have a 90-degree Allen key that fits there. If you've got a long one or a short one, if you're using anything that won't fit in this small gap here. So in order to make that work, we use the ball-headed Allen key. The ball makes it a little bit easier to work at an angle. You just got to make sure you push hard and you use it with the hand tool and not with a power tool, and then you can make it work. Otherwise, you got to make sure that you have one that will fit in this short gap. So just make sure, if you have a long one that fits, make sure you have the one with the ball, because the straight ones won't work. So this way, and don't use a power tool because you'll strip it. So you got to make sure you push hard and work slow in order to back that one out. Alright, so next thing we're going to do after we've got the brackets removed, all we have here left is the tank and the straps. So the next step to do is to remove the straps. So first step to removing the straps is we're just going to disconnect this here. After removing the bungee cord, we can really just pull the pull the strap to get it all backed out. All right, once you've kind of reached the end, and you'll see that you've gotten all the strap out from the top. Come around back and see where the strap is bolted on right here, and remove that with a 3mm Allen key. Once you have the 3mm Allen key bolt removed, make sure you keep that in a safe place because it's really small bolts, it's easy to lose. So make sure you either put it in your magnet bowl or make sure it's safe in the top cover to where it can't be lost. Alright, now that it's removed, we can start snaking off the strap. Okay, so we have the bolts out and we need to get the strap removed. So on the strap, you'll see the strap feeds into the pulley here, wraps around the pulley into this slot. So you'll see that's what holds the strap in place as it spins. So in order to remove it, we're going to feed excess slack through the slot, so we can come through here to just enable to grip the strap, and we will remove it from the pulley. Now that the strap is removed, we can pull it back through the slot, and then we will pull it through the pulley here, and then we can remove it. I'll just leave this amount of slack here. We're going to maintain the strap for later because it's going to be installed onto the new tank. But for now, we'll just push that to the side. Now we have the bottom strap, which we can just pull to remove. Once we've pulled it, you can see how it's connected. It's connected by a little clip or just a little U shape there that it hooks onto. So in order to remove it, you just pull it in the opposite direction. And feed it out. So you'll see this what hooks on into here. If you can see here, so this is what it hooks onto. There's a tiny little slot here. So in order, whenever we reinstall it, this we'll have to push up to make sure it feeds into the slot and hooked onto here. It's a little tricky the first time, but you just make sure it's hooked onto here real good and that it's not going anywhere. Okay, now that we have the straps off, next thing we need to do is make sure you know where everything belongs here on the board, because the new tank is just a tank with the board with the large pulley. We need to make sure you understand where the hardware belongs on these two spots. Make sure you understand that the hardware belongs not on the outside hole here, but it belongs on the inside hole here, and the same thing goes on this side. So make sure you understand what holes the rods are put into, and then what order the hardware is. So make sure when you take this off, this goes here, this here, the short spacer here, and make sure you know where your spacers are, or your washers. And then same thing, this is the long spacer with the pulley. So make sure you maintain where these belong. Oftentimes, whenever you are replacing a tank, and these pins will be stuck in place on these boards, so you'll have to use pliers or something to remove them. Oftentimes the pliers will damage these pins, rendering them almost unusable. So make sure the club has spare all of these hardware on hand in case they're damaged during removal, so that way you can install the new pins and pulleys on the new tank. Okay, after the pulleys are removed and we have the positions memorized and saved, the next thing we're going to need to do is to remove these two 5mm Allen key bolts in order to free the tank. These same bolts have the same cylinder nuts here and here. So once we remove these two 5mm nuts, we'll need to remove these two retaining cylinder nuts here. Since they're cylinder nuts and they're sunken in, consider bringing a magnet with you in order to lift them out, because it's hard to remove them without a magnet. Now that the bolts are removed and we saved the cylinder nuts, the tank is completely free. You can just lift it up and go throw it in the trash. You don't need it for anything else, just throw it away. Next step, I find it easiest to fill the new tank with water at the sink rather than running a hose all the way into here in order to fill it. So I just take it to the deep sink, fill it over there. Okay, next step, after we've already filled the tank, we fill to 17 and we put the chlorine tablets into the tank. I usually keep a rolling dolly with me, and that's what I use to transport to the sink, fill it up, and bring over here. That way I don't need to be running a bunch of hoses and stuff. Now we're going to lift this tank up and put it into place onto the rails here. It's pretty self-explanatory as to which way it goes. These holes will line up with these holes here on the rower. As I was, so before putting the tank into place, we're going to remove the old felt, because usually it's worn. I guess if it's not worn, then it's fine, but usually it's worn out. So we will remove this, usually just with the paint scraper, scrape all the old felt off, and get the new felt and stick it on. And this is, again, a material that some clubs, they just don't have on hand, so you can make sure you speak with your head trainers, so that way they know to have this stuff on hand if they're wanting a tank replaced, so that way the new tank isn't being damaged by the metal contacting the plastic. The felt creates a little bit of a cushion, so that way the tank doesn't prematurely wear out. Okay, so yeah, we use this paint scraper right here just to remove the adhesive. It pulls off most of the felt, and there's a little bit of residue left behind. I use Windex or WD-40 or whatever's just laying around to kind of lubricate what's left, and then continue scraping. So then I'll just get some cleaning supplies, and just let it kind of soak into the felt to continue scraping it off. And then you just want most of the felt off. If there's a little bit of adhesive left behind, it should be okay. You just want to make sure that there's a good surface for the new felt to bond to. Okay, so we'll have the fresh felt. Now it's time to put the tank in place. And again, I said orientation is the same. These bolts line up with these holes. And just a little common practice, just for your own safety, go ahead and put the plug in before moving it. It happens to where you set the tank down and then it just kind of water guns up and shoots you straight in the face while you're setting it down. So just for your own safety, so you don't get chlorine water in your eyeballs, just put the plug in when you're moving the tank. Okay, so now that the tank is in place, we see the holes here lining up. It can be a bit tricky, so first thing you're going to want to do is just make sure it's lined up in place. So it's a little tricky, you just got to make sure you're going straight and get through the hole there, so we know that's straight, and again straight on the other side. Just kind of play with it, and make sure you're straight to get to the hole. Come on. Sometimes it's easier to look from this side, there we go, and see that you're going straight through. And line the tank up so that way you know that they're straight. Okay? Now that they're straight, we'll pull them in. Now with these, there is a side with a groove and a side without the groove. You're going to want this groove faced up, so that way in case it goes in crooked, you can use a flathead to adjust. Keep a magnet handy in case it goes too far down. You're going to have to find the sweet spot to where the bolt lines up perfectly with the hole. It can be a little tricky at first, but you just play with it and make sure you get it. Make sure the line is perfectly parallel, so that way you can adjust that with the flathead, and you can use a magnet in order to adjust up and down. And the two bolts, we'll do them hand tight for now. We'll tighten them down all the way at the end of the video. We just want to be able to maneuver the tank a little bit if need be. So for the time being, just hand tight. Okay, so now it's time to put these pulleys back into place. So these ones came off without a problem, and so I didn't need to put new ones together. But obviously, if you had to pull them off with pliers and you damaged the pin, put new ones together. Just like I said, make sure that the club has these on hand whenever you start working on the rower, because if you do damage them taking them off, then the club's going to be out of rower for the whole next day, and they're usually not going to be pretty happy about that. But like I said, these ones worked out just fine, so we'll reinstall them. So you just put them back into the pins that they were in. Sometimes you can kind of put it into place a little bit like this, and then just kind of use a plastic hammer to hit them down. I like using the plastic hammer because I don't want to damage the hardware by hitting it in. Alright, so got it lined up into place and hammer it in, and then the same thing for the other side. Good. This will be level, even with each other. There we go. Shouldn't be any excess rubbing. It should be good. Pretty even. Okay, cool. This little piece of plastic right here works as a little spacer just in case the large pulley is riding on the little small one. So we got a little bit of space there, and that space is due to this right here. So just remove that from the other board, put it into place right here. It's got two little slots to put it into right there. Now that we have all of the pulleys and all the hardware into place, we'll go ahead and start getting the straps connected into their proper position. Okay, so now to get the straps on, we're going to start with the top strap, and we're going to just make sure that the top strap is on the pulley, okay? And then we're going to feed it through this top pulley here, and give yourself some slack. Okay, put it down so you can see. All right, now on here, you'll see there's the slot where the strap feeds in through. It needs to come around, and then the end needs to feed into the slot, and then let the hole match up with here, and then screw it in. So first step, feed through the long slot, and pull yourself a bunch of slack so you can fit. Pull your slack around, try it on the pulley. Okay. Now we've got our slack here, and let the hole of the strap match up with the hole for the threads. Now we're going to take our 3mm and put that into place. Now this is a little screw holding on a little strap, so you don't need the force of God. You just need to nice and easy put it on. Don't strip it out, don't force it, don't crack this cheap plastic. So just make sure you're careful. Don't overdo it. Alright, pull the slack out that you got in there. And then we can wind the pulley up. Winding the wrong way, sorry. Alright, wind the pulley up this way. And then we're going to wind it up all the way to where there's no more slack. Get it all the way till the handle is all the way up to the pulley on this end here. So just keep pulling. You need to pull slack off for yourself. Go ahead and start pulling it in. Okay, now we're ready to do the bottom strap. Bottom strap, okay? So what I'm going to do is I've got this tightened up all the way. I just get to where I can get to this here. And it hooks on, this hooks onto here. Now it's hard to see in the video, but there's a little hollow part right here. I'm not sure if you can see it there. So in order to hook this onto here, you have to come in at an angle up to fit into the hollow part, level it out, and pull so that way it hooks onto here perfectly because it goes up inside there. So you can see if you can see in the video without my fingers being in the way. But I'll hook it up. You see how it's going up inside of there? Up in and on. So now it's hooked on there. And I'll wrap it around the post one time all the way. Alright, so now it's wrapped around the post, and that's going to hold the connection in place so that way it doesn't just fall off. And then I'm going to feed it around the pulley right here and pull it all the way through. Okay. Now come over here. I'm going to take the pulley or the strap. I'm going to feed it down the pulley inside of here. Grab it on this side over here and feed it. Come over here to the front. Over here, other side. So you can see that it's pulled on here. Pull it tight. Make sure that all this is on here. There's no more slack. On the pulley, and then again on the bottom we're going to take it here, right here. The pulley's right there, so we're going to feed it through this pulley right here. Now that we have it fed through all the pulleys, we can connect it to the bungee cord strap here on the bottom. Now with the bungee cord strap here on the bottom, it's obviously very loose, and that's because this is wound up all the way, but still there should be more tension than that, and that's adjusted here. So in order to get more tension from the bungee cord, you adjust this to make the strap shorter. However, if there's an old worn bungee cord and then you're just constantly taking strap out of it, it's time to replace this bungee cord. Now this bungee cord, since it is so loose and this is far forward, I would replace this bungee cord. For the time being, I'm going to adjust the strap if the club does not have another bungee cord. Okay, so this club does have spare bungee cords. To show you the length difference between a worn one and a new one, I'll have them both starting here at the same point. Then pull, so you can see a new bungee cord is this much shorter and has a lot more tension. So if you get to the point to where it's that much that's bad, then we'll just go ahead and replace this bungee. And you can come look right here, and we just have to remove these two Allen keys and throw away this old bungee cord and replace the hardware on the new one.
We're good.
Okay, so now that I have the new bungee cord on here, you can see that the tension is much better. It's not just going to be sitting on the floor. So without having to adjust the strap, just the plain fresh bungee cord on the strap, it should be like this. If there's any kind of slack, if it's hanging down while it's sitting there, then it's time to replace the bungee cord or adjust the strap. I would adjust the strap up into a point, but if it's getting to the point where you're just running out of strap, you're still just not getting enough elasticity out of this. So your best bet is to replace the bungee cord to get the best service or the best quality of use out of the machine. Okay, so if you were going to replace the console, now's the perfect time to do it. So to replace the console, you would pull that cotter pin out from the holes that are here holding the spring in place, remove the console by just pulling it off, putting the new console through the slot, putting the spring back into place, compress the spring with a screwdriver or whatever it is that you need to compress the spring with, and then use the cotter pin to maintain it into place. Really simple process. Just make sure you compress the spring, push that through, and then that was how you replace the console. Once you have the new console, if needed, on here and mounted properly, then it's time to mount the console and bracket and the other bracket into place. Next, I need to put this back here. I will use these bolts. They'll go through this hole, and from that hole and that hole. Your tool can fit your long tool can fit through there and through there. So this one's really easy to install. You just use the long 4. You use the long 4 to put through there and there. There's a hole on this one to reinstall to here. You just have to remember that this one right here is the tricky one. You can either use a 90-degree 4mm, or you can use the long one with the ball head. You just got to make sure you're careful. Just make sure you don't strip it out. If you strip it out, then you're going to have more problems. So just be careful if you're using the long one. If you're using the short one, then you shouldn't have any problems. Okay, so before we put the top on, we'll take a good look at our sensor disc to make sure that it's in good shape. Obviously, this one is in bad shape. It looks like it's had some impact on these teeth here. And so we're just going to go ahead and pull that off. It just sits in there like this. You just pull the old one out, throw it in the trash, get the new one. It just sits on top, sits in there. And then it should be ready to go to get the board and the sensor put into place. Okay, so we got the new one. And like I said, it just pops into place. Just be careful while you're putting it on. You don't want to push on any of the teeth or damage the teeth. Just push it into place. Careful for the teeth. And then next, we will replace the sensor if need be. Okay, to replace this, I'm going to remove this Phillips head here, and here. It's got a staple here, so I'll just pull that out with some pliers, and that will remove the old one. And then I will put the new one in place. It's pretty. Okay, so for the new one, it can only go in one way. Obviously, the holes line up for where the screws go, but just make sure you have the sensor teeth facing out, so that way the sensor can go, or the the mouth can go, the teeth can go through it. Just make sure that's always faced up. You don't want it this way. And it's pretty self-explanatory, obviously. Now that I've replaced the sensor, it's time to put this board into place onto here. So I will line it up. The hole here lines up on this pin here. These two holes here line up onto those pins there. The best way to do it is to start using the big hole, and then for the two little ones you can adjust, with your hands and push the pin a little bit each way. Sometimes it's off by a few millimeters or a few centimeters, so if you gotta, with your finger kind of tug on one in order to line the holes up, that works out just fine. Make sure you connect the sensor to the console here, and then just make sure while you're installing the board onto here, you just be careful not to damage the sensor or the sensor teeth. Okay, so I'll line this up. Now, just keeping in mind, since there's nothing, this isn't screwed in here yet, there's nothing keeping it stabilized. So first I'll line this up, but obviously this is preventing this from lining up. So I'll just give it a little push in order to create some room to get it on. All right, so now I'm lined up on the center post, and now I'm going to look underneath here to line up the bottom posts. It looks like I need to pull the post this way a little bit in order to line up with this hole. And now this hole is aligned. And then I got to come to the other side and check on that. All right. Now this one looks like it's lining up. All right. Now we're in. Now I will inspect the flight to make sure that the teeth of the sensor wheel are in place, and I don't want to move it until I'm sure that everything's in place the right way. So I'll just get a light. I'll look in there really carefully to make sure that I'm not damaging the sensor wheel. Okay, looking here after tightening down the bolts, that the teeth do go through the sensor well without making contact. It runs through them pretty well, so it's going to read just fine. Next step is to run these long bolts through here and here, remembering that it has the cylinder nut. You want the groove faced down in here, so that way we can adjust it with a flathead if need be. Turn your light on there on, so you can see where it's going to feed up through. So you're going to use your finger or a flathead bit to hold it in place here while you guide this in through over here. It's kind of tricky, so I like if you use your finger, you can kind of feel when the threads catch. So it takes a little practice to get it, but once you get it the first time, then you figure it out and it'll work right every time. It just takes a little playing with to learn what it feels like whenever it's on there. Okay, now that these are all in place and they're hand tight, we're sure that everything lines up, everything worked out just fine with installing it. Now we can go back ahead and tighten these back up a little bit better instead of just loose hand tight. We'll tighten these up. Okay, thank you. Alright, so after tightening up these bolts here and here, we can go ahead and tighten up or install the two bolts here to secure the entire board. These are installed with a 4mm Allen key. After all that's installed, we can go ahead and put the hood cover back on. So to get the hood cover back on, you'll notice the pulleys sticking out of each side on both ends. So you come in from the back, slide it over, and it'll fall right into place. Now this tank still wiggles side to side a little bit. The foot plate's what secures that into place. So if you put the hood cover on and you notice that the holes do not line up perfectly, you can still adjust the tank to line them up. So make sure that it's lined up so that way you don't strip out all your hardware trying to tighten it up, something that's not aligned. So just adjust the tank, make sure you're perfectly aligned so that way you're not cross-threading things unnecessarily. Okay, so to put these on, just make sure, carefully, just make sure you're not cross-threading and it's going on there. And this will have a flat end on each side, so just make sure that the flat end lines up with this groove right here, so that way it's flat and it'll hold the handles in place. Okay, so now these are screwed back into place, everything's solid. The water plug's back in place, the window's back on, chlorine's in there, water's filled. And so now what we're going to do is test for proper operation. We can turn the console on. And first thing we're going to do is pull on here and see if we're getting reading, and we are, of our watts and distances and all that jazz. We're getting good recoil on the strap, so when you come forward it should recoil forward. Something sounds funny in there, so now we're going to open back up and see what that sound is. Okay, after you've tested the treadmill, it works and runs great, everything's good. What you need to do is adjust the foot strap, or the bungee cord. So if the bungee cord ends up being behind the foot plate here, every time the person would row, it would come forward and make contact right here, and the plastic on the metal is going to make a loud clanking sound every time they row. So to avoid the clanking sound, we shorten the strap by adjusting it here, by just taking out more slack. So if you take out the slack, pull it out, adjust it to where it stays there, and then connect the bungee cord to force the bungee cord forward of the foot strap, or the foot plate. That way there's no clanking sounds. Now we'll do one final test, make sure that it runs smoothly, the watts are reading correctly, the foot strap or the bungee cord isn't making contact to the foot plate, everything's running smooth, no crazy sounds, everything's good, no leaks. Then we'll go ahead and put it back in service. If we found anything that was wrong with this, that there's no parts for, we make sure we just document that and leave those notes for the club so they can order the parts.